Hello there guys, what is going on? Son of Chelsea back here again for another edition of Let's Talk Chelsea. Hope you're all doing well and keeping safe on this Thursday. Going to be talking in today's episode about Kurt Zouma, Callum Hudson-Odoi and Chelsea's search for a defensive midfielder. But before we get into any of that, I want to ask you guys, if you haven't already, hit that subscribe button and the notification bell so you never miss an upload. Also hit the like button if you're enjoying the content because it helps out the channel as well. And if you're listening on the podcast, please rate and review because that helps too. Let's firstly get into Kurt Zouma. I found this story interesting. It's from Monday from David Ornstein in The Athletic, and we heard over the summer there was a lot of confusion, a lot of debate around the centre-backs, the centre-back problem. Of course, eventually bringing in Thiago Silva on a free, but concern over who would be let go because it seemed for a while that Fabrizio Romano would be going out on loan, and it seemed Antonio Rudiger, being an outcast, was going to be sold very late on. That did not happen, and we've got currently 5 centre-backs at the club, and there's interest and sort of intrigue on what's going to happen. I've spoken about this recently in terms of Fabrizio Romano and Antonio Rudiger in January coming up. Where do they go? Will they still be at the club after that window? Which one stays? And seeing how much football either of those players could get. And then Andreas Christensen on top of that. I've spoken a lot about that and him and my belief that I don't think he'll have a long-term future at Chelsea. But also Chelsea's sort of hesitance to let Andreas Christensen go. But we did hear early on in the window, I believe like July time, so the season was still going on, 1920, where there was suggestions that Kurt Zouma could be let go this summer because Chelsea believed that of all the centre-backs they had, they could get sort of the biggest fee out of Kurt Zouma because there were teams interested in him. And one of those was Everton, the club he went on loan to in 1819. And apparently, according to David Ornstein in The Athletic, Frank Lampard blocked an inquiry this summer from Everton for Kurt Zouma. Zouma, who is highly thought of at Goodison Park after a loan spell in 2018-19, Lampard's faith in the French defender has been reflected in 4 Premier League starts this term. I think that was the right move, to be honest, out of all the current centre-backs we had. And there was lots to talk about, you should just sell like 2 or 3 centre-backs. That was never going to happen in this summer, especially Chelsea's inability and sort of struggle this year to sell unwanted players. But also, why would you let all those players go? Then you have to sign 2 players on top of that as well. So I think that was always going to be a difficulty. Of course, eventually bringing in Thiago Silva, which I think hopefully will turn out to be a smart signing. I think it was more of an opportunistic, sort of pragmatic short-term signing. But we hope that will improve the defence this year. And of course, you know, it's very easy to look at just recent games and make a judgment on a player. I think we're very much in football just sort of quite reactive in terms of thinking about a player like one week you can think they're brilliant and the next week you see them make a massive mistake and you think, oh, they're shaky now. I think broadening out the picture on Kurt Zouma, I think he was one of our most consistent defenders last year. I want to see him alongside Thiago Silva, and that's my big thing. You know, of course, in recent games against Southampton, he had that massive mistake for the second goal, very culpable and responsible in that second goal against Southampton, his sloppy back pass, and also there was some shaky moments against Sevilla as well. I don't know if that's sort of a follow-on from that game against Southampton, but I think now Frank Lampard having Thiago Silva back, having Edouard Mendy fit, having Chilwell fit, sort of the good competition between Dave and Reece for the right back spot. I think we want to see a consistent back four now, and that's not going to help for Kyle Tomori, Christensen or Rudiger. And there's a lot to be said, I think, in terms of January, especially Rudiger and Tomori, what's going to happen with them, because I think still one of those you want to keep. You want to have 4 centre backs in the squad still. But for me, Kurt Zouma, I think this is big. And I think this is a great opportunity for Zouma now to really create a solid partnership at Chelsea that really he hasn't been able to do it in his Chelsea career. There was a brief moment, I believe it was the 15-16 season, where him and JT looked like they could form a good partnership. Then he got that terrible injury. And after that terrible injury, he had to go out on loan to Stoke and Everton, then returning to Chelsea. This is the moment Zouma really needs to take his place at Chelsea. If he wants to be the long-term defender at Chelsea, he really wants to become a mainstay in our back line, which I think he's got the opportunity to do so. I think he needs to create this partnership with Thiago Silva, and hopefully that will happen now. I think that's also down to Frank Lampard picking a consistent back four, at least, you know, for the Premier League games at the moment. I could understand with the midweek Champions League games, with say Krasnodar next week and Rennes the week after that, you could see slight rotation in that area. I don't mind that, but I think especially for the Premier League games coming up, for that Man United game on Saturday evening, it's, I think, imperative that Frank Lampard keeps that consistent back four so we can start to get some chemistry and really hope to improve that area of the pitch that's so weak recently. Please let me know your opinions on Kurt Zouma, because I think there still will be a clamour in January, and especially I'm sure next summer, potentially for Chelsea to go out and sign a new centre-back. We've heard rumours recently about Jimenez again from Atletico Madrid and other players as well. Please let me know your opinions on Kurt Zouma, Frank Lampard blocking an inquiry from Everton in the comments below. Next is from Fabrizio Romano and Callum Hudson-Odoi. The rumours around Callum Hudson-Odoi that were swirling just before the end of the summer transfer window. Of course, Chelsea rejecting a bid from Bayern Munich right at the end there, and nothing really happened on deadline day. He stayed at Chelsea, which was good. This was on his podcast the other day, saying that Chelsea are not looking to sell Callum Hudson-Odoi in January. If a club wants him next summer, they will need to pay 80 million euros to sign him. This is not a massive surprise, Chelsea turning down that massive bid, which was a loan potentially with an option to buy next summer from Bayern Munich, and sort of Bayern Munich's interest in him. And it's going to be intriguing to me, that situation, because I can't be overly confident that Bayern are just going to go away and accept defeat now, even though they've been rejected twice by Chelsea in trying to get Callum Hudson-Odoi out of the club. I wrote a piece for the CFC fanzine recently about Callum Hudson-Odoi, all about the timing of a young player's career, especially at top clubs, and his timing at Chelsea, where it seemed to go in his favour under Sarri in 18-19, and he broke into the first team, looked really exciting, looked like he was going to make that place his own on the right wing of Chelsea's attack. Then, of course, got that terrible injury, and I think you could make comparisons to, say, Ruben Loftus-Cheek, and in sort of a similar trajectory at the time, and it really halting him. I think Hudson-Odoi's had a bit more luck, getting back to the first team earlier last season in 1920. And then once again, it looked like he came in under Lampard, looked confident, dropped form, got re-injured again, and that was really difficult for him to get ahead of Willian or Christian Pulisic at the back end of last year. It's a similar problem now that Chelsea have, and I think there is still an opportunity for Hudson-Odoi to get minutes under Frank Lampard. I think there is still that uncertainty about how Lampard's going to line up that attack. I'm a bit stunned at the moment and we spoke about this a lot yesterday, and a lot of you guys gave strong opinions in the comments yesterday about this whole Mason Mount, Christian Pulisic situation, and I think this almost feeds into the Callum Hudson-Odoi situation, right? Because now the issue Frank Lampard had in the opening weeks of the season, where he still could play Callum Hudson-Odoi, and actually did against Crystal Palace, West Brom, Tottenham and Barnsley, didn't he? After not really playing Hudson-Odoi in the first two league games of the season, where both Pulisic and Ziyech were out. So if you want to play that 4-2-3-1 situation, you had to make do with, say, shifting Mount out there just for an option. But I think now he's got the fit wingers. I'd like to see more natural wide players in natural wide positions for me. And I think Hudson-Odoi should be given an opportunity. I just think it's that issue now with Ziyech in the team, and you want to be giving him minutes to get back up to full fitness. Where are those minutes going to come from? And then it leads you to think, if Hudson-Odoi is still on sort of the edge of the Chelsea first team, he's only really getting brief sub appearances. He's not starting games like, say, Krasnodar next week. Sure, it's a very important Champions League game that Chelsea need to win, but you still would think in rotation-wise, that could be a good game for Hudson-Odoi to feature in for Chelsea and really make an impression. Where are those minutes going to come from? And I think that's an issue for a lot of players in this very huge squad. As I've always stated, I think having a huge squad is very valuable, more valuable than ever in this season. But it will still be that issue, and I still think that Hudson-Odoi, the issues and sort of the Hudson-Odoi, the rumours around him are going to keep swirling. I'm still unsure on his long-term future. I think it's so imperative he gets on the pitch, but will he get on the pitch? If Ziyech clicks, if Frank finds sort of that free behind the striker and settles on it quickly, which could be, say, Pulisic, Havertz and Ziyech, which I think a lot of us expect it might be. Please let me know your opinions on Hudson-Odoi. Do you think there'll be interest in him in January from Bayern potentially, or next summer? Please let me know in the comments below. And lastly, Chelsea's search, and I think a very pressing search for a defensive midfield solution for Chelsea's midfield, because the balance issue this year has been so present. It's been a constant discussion, what's the best midfield pivot, what's the best midfield we can have, Jorginho, Kovacic, Kante, what can give us the greatest protection, and sort of the issue there. And there was links yesterday from Christian Falk, who I have to admit, in recent weeks in terms of Chelsea stories about Mason Mount has been rubbished, and I think Callum Hudson-Odoi as well, but he was very reliable in terms of transfer around German teams, and Chelsea apparently are in for Denis Zakaria from Borussia Monchengladbach, the defensive midfielder, and as he claims here, United are in, also Bayern have made their interest clear on the midfielder, and Zakaria is an interesting player. He's one of these names that is constantly been linked in recent months, very impressive for Monchengladbach, and it was interesting reading this scout report from Breaking the Lines that I'll leave the link in the description box below for, sort of describing Zakaria, his strengths, sort of why so many big clubs are looking at him recently. He's actually currently injured, hasn't played for Monchengladbach so far this season, and it's a knee injury that's been going on for a long time. He didn't play at all in Project Restart for Monchengladbach as well, so it's been a long-standing injury, still yet to feature. So I think that's a concern if a team was to go in for him in January. I think that could potentially halt a move because he's still lacking match fitness, hasn't played a lot for them recently. But from what we know from last season, this is just some things to pick out from the scout report. Standing at 6 feet 3 inches tall, Denis Zakaria is a man mountain, not only in his tall frame, but he is powerfully built. He's got a fantastic engine room too, capable of running around for all of the 90 minutes non-stop. He once covered a remarkable 7 kilometers in a league game against Cologne, and further backed up the performance with an 88% pass success rate, a dual win rate of 80%, whilst also accumulating 61 touches of the ball. What's also so unique about Zakaria is he's not your typical defensive midfielder, one who sticks in front of the defence and fulfills his swashbuckling duties. While he can perform the role with such astuteness, drive and aplomb, he's more of your typical box-to-box midfielder. Zakaria is well capable of driving his team up the pitch with his sheer size, power and aggression and speed on the ball. The 23-year-old is incredibly versatile and can play in different roles across the midfield as a box-to-box and as a destructive defensive midfielder. Per 90 mins in the Bundesliga in 1920, Zakaria averaged nearly 7 passes whilst under pressure. He attracts pressure, but he's got the balance, power and prowess to overcome it. So I'm really impressed by Zakaria. I'm really impressed by Mönchengladbach generally under Marco Rose. Of course, they started their Champions League campaign because they finished 4th in the Bundesliga last season, qualifying for the Champions League. They drew 2-2 with Inter last night. Quite an exciting game. I think that the knee injury, as I said already, and Chelsea's search for a defensive midfielder, I think this whole DM conundrum sort of debate has been going on for so long because Chelsea lack at the moment a classic DM. And if Frank Lampard wants to play, at the moment he's playing a 4-2-3-1, and I think that's very much dictated not only with the players he has currently, but also bringing in Kai Havertz, and you sort of have to play to Havertz's strength to sort of become the creative sort of focal point of Chelsea's attack at the moment, and you don't really want to limit Kai Havertz, especially such a young player coming in for such a big fee. Chelsea want to really build a team around Kai, so I understand that. But in terms of getting that balance in Chelsea's midfield, which we've struggled with Jorginho, Kante, Kovacic, none of those players sort of a natural DM that you can just place at the centre of the park. And I think, it's a similar issue with Zakaria. If Zakaria was to come in, he could be a decent, destructive sort of defensive midfielder, but are you limiting what he can do as well? And once again, you're sort of getting into that territory where you haven't got a player that's very much suited to that role, and you'd be limiting his game, and would that limit Chelsea's midfield once again? I also always come back to the thing that Declan Rice seems to be the clear first choice for Chelsea. And as we've seen recently with Ben Chilwell, with Kai Havertz, with other players across the summer, when Chelsea want a first choice target in the moment, they're getting them over the line. So I think whenever I hear of other DMs linked, I always think back to Declan Rice, and I think it's the same situation as Ben Chilwell, because for months and months and months, we heard about Alex Telles, Tagliafico, other names as well throughout that list, linked to Chelsea, Reguilon later on as well, but it was always Ben Chilwell, and I think it's going to be similar with the DM situation in terms of recruitment. I think you'll hear a lot of names spouted, but I think Chelsea, it will always go back to Declan Rice, because I generally think that's the first choice target for Chelsea, and I think they will try their best to get Declan Rice in. But then not just looking at Declan Rice, whether that's January or next summer, constantly talking about Declan Rice as if he's just going to come to Chelsea inevitably, which I do think he will, but I think it's interesting as well to look at the current squad, and can we find a solution? Can Lampard find a solution, at least in the short term, to fix this problem? And I think that Billy Gilmour, for me, is the name that comes to mind. I know it's a really short sample size, and he is a young player, and you don't want to put too much pressure on him, especially when he's coming back from a big injury, apparently 3 to 4 weeks until he returns to, I guess, first team training or can play for the first team. So he's going to need to work his way back, and we know injuries have an effect on players, and that's going to affect his performance level this season, of course, and you need to give that patience. But when we look back at the 2 games just pre-lockdown, the Billy Gilmour started as sort of the lone DM in a midfield 3. He was wonderful. He gave a wonderful balance. It was the most balanced sort of in those 2 games. It was just, you noticed it instantly. It was the first time in a while Chelsea looked so certain in their midfield. There was a lovely balance between Billy Gilmour sitting deep, having that mobility, but also having the passing range to move Chelsea up the pitch and create something for the 2 number 8s in front of him, which for both of those games were Ross Barkley, who's now on loan at Aston Villa, and also Mason Mount. And both of those games against Liverpool and Everton were wonderful from Billy Gilmour. He looked so mature, and he was sort of sort of the best of everything in terms of what you want from Kante, in terms of that intercepting, but also mobility to move up the pitch, in terms of Jorginho, his ability to dictate play. It showed you a brief glimpse of what Billy Gilmour could turn into. As I say, that's maybe a short-term solution, and once again, you don't want to put too much pressure, because comparing those two brilliant performances from Gilmour that we saw when he started just before lockdown to the performances he put in post-lockdown, with, you know, when he's playing alongside N'Golo Kante, he looked much more erratic. He looked much more his age in terms of giving the ball away and looking a little bit more unsure in midfield. And I think you have to balance that as well. Bringing him into this team, will he still be able to replicate what he did against Liverpool and Everton, and understanding that patience in what is such a key area of the pitch? And in terms of the midfield battle, Chelsea winning that midfield battle, I spoke about it yesterday. You know, if at the moment Frank sort of, it seems to be that balance issue, not only in terms of being overrun in midfield, but if Lampard wants to play a little bit deeper, as we saw against Sevilla, that could cause an issue creatively for Chelsea. You know, you don't want to see that type of performance against Sevilla over and over again, because it's going to limit our attackers and it's just going to nullify us in front of goal, and that's an issue as well. So it's a massive question. I do lean in a direction. I think that Declan Rice will be the inevitable transfer. I also always think when we're bringing up this conversation in terms of DM solutions, I always have to bring up Ethan Ampadu, because that could be the answer to Chelsea. I always find it just a little bit interesting of finding an answer internally rather than going out and spending 70 to 80 million on a player, because I think it would be a nice story if Billy Gilmour could turn out to be the answer, and I think it would reflect well on Frank Lampard as a coach if he could make Billy Gilmour that player, you know, bring him into the first team. He's the answer, and we move forward with that. An academy graduate coming into the first team and really thriving under Frank Lampard, which I think would be an interesting answer. But you always do lean back in a direction based on our amazing summer transfer window, how serious Chelsea are, that they will go out and spend big on a DM. Do you think it will be Declan Rice, or do you think Zakaria could be a name Chelsea go after? Please let me know in the comments below. But that is it for this episode of Let's Talk Chelsea. Thank you guys so much for taking the time to watch it. If you did enjoy it, hit that subscribe button and the notification bell so you never miss an upload. Follow me on Twitter @SonOfChelsea. Have a great day, and I'll see you again